Well, welcome to episode number 2 of the Let Love Begin podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about perception versus reality and how to make sense of your last breakup. I don't know about you, but it's really easy after a breakup to ruminate and keep going over and over and over what happened and your role in it and what you could have done better. And oftentimes the reality becomes distorted. So we're going to talk about that today and talk about how if our perception of the breakup is really not matching the reality of what actually happened, then this can really play a big role in keeping you stuck and unable to move forward. So without further ado, welcome to this episode with Elizabeth Overstreet, who is a relationship coach and love strategist who helps her clients prepare for and find and nurture healthy relationships. This is Let Love Begin, a podcast for the recovering brokenhearted, ready to heal and reclaim their enthusiasm. Welcome, Elizabeth. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on, Talia. I'm excited to be on your podcast tonight.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to have you. So today I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about is the perception, or answering the question rather, is the perception of my breakup the reality of what actually happened? Now, I feel like this is one of those questions that changes. Because obviously when we break up with someone, we're in a pretty shocked state. So when I ask you that question, what's your initial reaction?
I think breakups are pretty interesting because I think there's a series of emotions that you go through, that you spin through in your mind, and also physically you feel effects of it and emotionally. And I think it's similar to just loss in general. Whenever we lose something that we care about or that we hold dear to our heart, there's a range of feelings and emotions we're going to have with it. I think breakups are interesting though, because sometimes people approach it differently. There are people that totally just quadrant themselves off and go somewhere where they just stay in solitude for a while to work through it. Some people go and find their support group or their tribe to get through it. Some people jump to another relationship right away. Everyone has very different reactions to it. And then some people are very contemplative. Some people are blaming themselves for it. And I think, the right mix is all of those things in a way, because I think you have to give yourself grace when you go through a breakup. So you're going to feel a lot of different emotions. You're going to feel lost. That's normal. But I think the main thing is allowing yourself to feel. I think there's just this desire sometimes when things hurt to numb out or not deal with it. But it always has a way of circling back to you and catching up.
Yeah, it really does. It's kind of a case of deal with it now or deal with it later.
Yes. And I use myself as a guinea pig. This is not related to like a breakup per se, but I lost my dad, several months ago in June. And I lost my mom within the last 18 months. And there were times it would have been easier to just numb out those feelings and say, look, I don't really have time to like grieve, which sounds weird to people, but sometimes grief we know is going to take us to a place where we're disconnected and we feel very sad and we're emotional and it's unpredictable. So for people who really want to control outcomes, it's hard sometimes to relinquish to that. But what I found is like I had to just allow myself to feel what I feel. So there could be moments where I do cry or I am upset about it, or it could be a moment of joy when I remember something, that my parents, experiences we had together. But what I have been learning through this experience is like it's a process. And I never know when I'm going to have those feelings. And I wish we would give ourselves more of that grace, especially in relationships, because again, losing someone who you love, who you thought you'd be in a relationship with, I think it's hard because we put time into building these relationships. Then one day someone just says, you know what, I can't do this. Or, the breakup is because of other reasons. And it's just, I think all of those are tough situations for people to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think grief's something you can speed up, right? You just
No.
Actually, in my experience personally, what you're saying, sitting with the pain is the quickest way to speed it up, but it's the most painful because for me anyway, if you, like I was numbing, pushing things back, pushing things away, and it just rolled on for years and years. Yeah, I'm not saying it wouldn't have anyway, but it really kind of lengthened it out and it didn't hurt anyone except for me.
Yes.
It was more painful for me to do that.
Right, because you're just pocketing it. And I think, the best example I could think of is like when you have a bruise, you fall, you hurt yourself, you put a Band-Aid on it, maybe some Neosporin or whatever remedy you use to like make that, that scar or that thing heal and it not scar. But the reality is, you lift the Band-Aid too soon, it may not be fully healed. Or if you leave it on too long, then it may, it may heal in a weird way. But the whole point of it is that it's a process of time. And it just takes time to really heal. And I think that until you do that, sometimes what happens is you end up repeating similar patterns in relationships. It's so easy because it's just human nature to want to be loved, to want to be in a relationship, to want to feel connected to someone. So it's easy sometimes to not deal with those emotions by either jumping into something else or to just shut down and say, I'm not going to even think about it. I'm going to pretend like everything's okay. And then all of a sudden you're maybe in another relationship or another circumstance in your life, and all those feelings are like, boom. And you're triggered by something so mundane. You're like, where is this coming from? And I think a lot of it's because we keep pocketing down and not really letting ourselves heal, similar to the when you bruise yourself, just giving yourself that time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy. That's I used to say that when I was breaking up. I keep ripping the scab off. Like I'm getting there, and then I'm like, oh, let me hurt myself again. I'm just gonna rip the scab off, and it starts bleeding, and you're like, it was getting there. Like, why?
And then you got to start all over.
I know. Well, you're like, I mean, it shrinks. It shrinks a little. You know how scabs shrink a little bit, but yeah. You're effectively leaving a deeper scar. Is what you're doing. Well, that's what I did anyway. So, speaking from personal experience, it's definitely not a fun thing to do.
No, I've been there. That's why I do the work I do. Look, when I take off my relationship coaching hat, I'm human, just like you guys. I'm human in general, but I'm even human in the sense that I'm learning, figuring things out, not always making the right decisions, making mistakes. But I just want to like really help shorten people's curve of learning, because I just think if we talk about these things more and we normalize it more, that people feel more comfortable having these conversations. And I think, unfortunately, we're not always getting the full picture of like how complicated relationships could be or how hard they could be. So people are almost set up for failure. They get in and they're like, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right, because they don't have anyone as far as an outlet to talk to or really compare or know what's normal, what's not normal, some of the hurdles you go through. So I just want people to know that like it happens to all of us. Like we're all on a level playing field, no matter if we're a supermodel. We've learned that recently, not naming celebrities, but I guess naming celebrities, with Giselle and Tom Brady. I mean, no one is immune to relationship hurts. I think knowing that should make it a little more normalized that we go through these things, but let's talk about how we cope and get better so we're not making the same mistakes over and over.
Totally. Yeah, that is true. No one's immune. There's been, many women put this pressure on themselves, because of society. But then we see these beautiful supermodels and famous people, and they're still have infidelity in their relationships. I'm not saying that it's okay or not okay, but it's like, it happens to everyone. Yeah. And it's still not cool, but it's like, oh, sometimes we have this feeling where it's like, it's only me. I feel like I'm alone. I think I don't know about you, but so many people come to me and say that, like, oh, it just feels so nice to talk it out. I mean, truth be told, that's why we're here. So
I'm all about talking it out, as you can see. Sometimes you got to shut me out or tell me to be quiet, because I have so much to say on this, because I feel like the quality of your relationships has such a huge impact on your life.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't choose well, it affects you emotionally, mentally, financially, spiritually, sexually. So really being intentional about who you decide to connect with, why you connect with them, aligning on your values, understanding how to work through the conflict. That's where I think if we could dial into that more. I'm more so, always curious about when couples come to me for counseling, like, how do you deal with the difficult moments? Because that is usually the predictive thing that tells you if that relationship could sustain itself. Because when someone's at their worst, how are they showing up for you? How are they communicating with you? How are they supporting you? I mean, we're not robots. We all have emotions. We don't always react the right way, but is it very detrimental? And do you see those signs early on? And like, if you could pick up on those things, then the quality of your relationships can get better, right? Because you're building awareness around, let me not just look at this right now where it's all roses and sunshine, but let me look at like kind of the worst case scenarios. Because the reality in a relationship is you're going to go through ups and downs. You're going to go through challenges. You're going to have setbacks. Your life is going to change. You're going to be challenged. You may have loss in your life. You may have someone get ill. And so you want to know that this person can really be there through these different seasons of your life.
So in a breakup, what is your strategy to discern reality from fiction? And how can we encourage our minds to see the facts and make stuff up?
I think like a breakup doesn't just happen, without a reason. Usually there's some rationale. There's something that's happened between that couple where they just have hit a breaking point. I mean, can people come back from that? Sometimes, yes, they can. I mean, it just depends on the timing, because sometimes people's lives, it's not the right timing for that relationship, or they don't have the right level of maturity. But I think, figuring out the reality versus the not, I guess like the false parts of it, it's just really, knowing yourself. I go back to this all the time with people that I, coach. It's really important to know yourself, because when you know who you are, you kind of know, okay, these are my values. This is my moral compass. This is what I want, what I don't want. And I know we all talk about deal breakers, and I kind of have like it gets under my skin a little bit, because I do think we usually have deal breakers, but I think realistically in any relationship, anyone can speak to this probably, you broke one of your deals. So it really, and so I'm not saying there shouldn't be a deal breaker, but I think we need to give ourselves grace on what we really, really consider a deal breaker, right? Because I do think there's hard cut things. Like if someone's abusive to you, that's a deal breaker.
Yeah, of course.
If someone has addiction issues and they don't want to get help, that could be a deal breaker. If there's infidelity and there's no, there's no apology around it, or no trying to make it better, because you say you do want to work it out, that's a deal breaker. But for some people, just the fact or the act of infidelity could be a deal breaker.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
The reality is, if you ask any couple or lots of couples that are together, there are things that they didn't think they would be willing to break on, but they've settled with. So going back to your question about like what should happen, I think like assessing who you are, what you want, what's important to you is one step. I think number 2 is doing an inventory. I think it's very important to like put things in writing. And this is the hardest thing for my clients. They hate the homework, but I think they hate the homework because they have to get real with themselves, and they have to uncover things similar to what you were saying, like how we push down grief or we push down pain. And how you said when you went through that yourself, Tali, you're like, man, it keeps resurfacing. And so I really encourage people to do an inventory, like, why were you in this relationship? What did you really value in this relationship? What made you decide to end this relationship? I think there's power in putting, what do you want in the next relationship? Like, I think there's power in creating these quadrants almost on a piece of paper, to you seeing, okay, what was this relationship? Because sometimes when you put things on paper, you're like, dang, I stayed way too long. Or you might look at it conversely and say, oh man, there's actually a lot of things I liked about this person. So I think that's kind of your reality versus the false story, like really getting concrete on what you need, what you want, and how that relationship served you. But I think something else happens when you put it on paper that can make it true or false in your mind, is you now have more of a picture of what happened. And you can go back to that. And when you're feeling weak, like maybe I should go back to this person, you could look at that piece of paper and say, nope, these are the 10 reasons I walked away from this relationship. I'm going to stand solid. Even though I feel lonely for this moment, even though I feel weak for this moment, I am not going to allow myself to go backwards. It almost gives you, I guess, like a grasp of reality, but a visual reality to reshape how you're thinking of your relationships. And then the other piece is just you starting to see patterns. Because a lot of times, like I say to my clients, like, you're 50% of the problem and 100% of the solution.
I love that.
Yeah. And if people are like 50% of the problem, 100% of the solution, but there was another person in the relationship.
That's why you're only 50% of the problem.
Right. Exactly. You got it right away. Some people don't get it right away. And so that means you always have the power to walk away. You always have the power to say, this is what I'm not going to deal with, but you have to take that power. It's on you. And it's one of the most difficult things. And I remember like someone saying that to me, like I remember being in a bad relationship. They're like, it's on you. And I'm like, what? What do you mean it's on me? I just told you all the things that this person has done. Mm-hmm. They're like, no, it's on you, because you are the person who can make the decision to stand in this or to move away. Mm-hmm. And for me, this is before I did my coaching. It was like a powerful moment where I was like, they're right. Like I can make a decision to leave. There's nothing holding me there.
Yeah, it's your power. Yeah. It's nice, isn't it, when you have those friends who like kind of lovingly slap you in the face?
Totally.
And you're like, oh yeah, you're right. Like take your power back.
Right.
Yeah. Because that's the thing, right? It's just our life. We get to decide. So if we're in a breakup, or if we're in a relationship that we don't like, we can break it up. A lot of people are like, I don't want to break up. And it's like, okay, cool. Well, the alternative is you're going to put in the work. The third alternative is that you do nothing and you just keep going the same way you are.
You're in limbo. It's like being in limbo. It's like you're just stuck. Like
Yeah.
You have a decision to move on. You have a decision to work it out, or you have a decision to just be uncomfortable. And as much as like we'll say a breakup is uncomfortable, sometimes being somewhere you don't want to be is even more uncomfortable.
100%.
And when you finally break away, you're like, oh, like, why did I waste all this time, energy here? And then immediately, I mean, I've seen this happen with my clients, with myself. Immediately, your life improves because you just weren't in the right relationship. And it's hard. It doesn't mean you don't love the person or you don't want to make it work. But I think when you can kind of have those little wins, which is why it's important to write down, why did I leave this or why do I want to leave it? I often have people that are like come to me and they're just on that cusp. They're talking to me about it for years. And they're like, I don't know. It's just hard. What should I do, Elizabeth? What do you want to do? It's just very interesting how you can tell they want to be out of it, but they have to, I say, you have to make the decision. Elizabeth, I could tell you all the signs and indicators, but you're coming to me because you want to be out of it, but you have to execute.
It's interesting, isn't it? When we go to our friends and we want them to tell us what to do. I think it's so important to really kind of look inwards and make your own decision. People get influenced a lot by their friends, which is not always a bad thing. But I think a lot of times it's like, well, it's your life. You have to live it. Every single moment you are there. So if you're asking people for advice who have different values and are different people and are very flippant with their words, that's something to be cautious of, I think.
Totally. Humans are interesting though. Like I love data. So I always want to know kind of the data behind relationships and things like this. And most of the time, like I remember reading, like if you know your spouse or significant other is cheating, you're probably right. I think it was like over 90% of the time. It was some crazy number. And I know infidelity is maybe an easier thing to point to, but the bottom line is what that told me outside of infidelity is that we are very instinctual and very intuitive. And we need to lean into that. And I think if people look at their life, it's not just heart and mind, it's heart, mind, and intuition. I always say, it's the wrapping of all these things that we're given. And a lot of times we feel things, we know, but we do have confirmation bias, meaning like we will go out there and look for information to support our position. And we're like dogged about it. So to your point, you will go to 3 of your friends, should I break up? And let's say you go to 2 of them are like, yeah, I think it's definitely over. And if that one says, no, maybe, then you will lean into that one if that's what you want to do. Humans are very interesting that way.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. It's interesting because I was dating a guy and he was kind of obsessed with his partners not being influenced by their friends. And I was like, dude, chill out. Like people are going to talk and like people are allowed to be influenced by whoever they want to be influenced. At the end of the day, it's the person making the decision. And that's why it's like, well, it's my job to stay strong in myself. And if I don't, that's on me. But why is it such a huge thing for you? I think he'd been in relationships where other women had not shed great light on him. And I was like, well.
So he built this story up in his head. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's got this story.
Yeah, like whenever someone is really strong-willed about something, what I've learned is there's a foundation or some kind of history behind why they feel that way. And when you dig into it, you're like, oh, and they're holding on to that belief system. I just think about how like we're influenced just by little things when we're younger, someone saying you're smart or you're not pretty or you're not this, and how people will hold on to that self-belief for life until someone breaks it because you built this neural pathway in your brain where that's the record playing in your head, and you literally have to break that track.
It's funny that you said that. Actually, I was just talking to one of my really good friends about this. She sat down on the couch and she said, "Hey, what do you think about?" She's talking about her children. What do you think about the concept of rewarding your children or praising your children for the effort rather than the work they do? Because she's talking about her younger son. She was like, every time he does something, she goes, I get really excited and make a big deal about it. And she's like, and I say, oh, that's amazing. This is great. And she goes, rather than saying that's such a good effort. And I was like, interesting, because I'm very conscious of when I'm praising young girls, I never say anything about their looks because it's like, I don't want to, be telling you look a certain way. And that gives you value. You already have inherent value. It's not the way you look. So I said to her, sometimes people will say things like, I'm clever or you're really clever. And she said, yeah, but even that's problematic. But she made a really good point. She's like, it's all about the effort because it doesn't matter what the outcome is. We're such an outcome driven society. But it really got me thinking because I was like, that's what it is in relationships as well. When someone puts in an effort and you can see it and feel it, even if things don't go your way, if you genuinely can see that they're trying in their own way, even if it doesn't match with yours, that is like so helpful. that shows that you're actually here with me doing this thing. The point she was making was like, she said, I got told I was really good all the time at this certain thing. So then she goes, when I stopped being the best at it, I stopped putting in effort. And I was like, wow, that is really interesting. And she goes, I remember. And I was like, huh. And she's like, what did you think? And I was like, I don't think I was that conscious. I don't think I was that aware.
That is interesting. Yeah. I can see that. I think it's a balance, right? Like, I think one extreme versus the other is always like a little delicate. But I think I like what you're saying about relationships, because I think people, they go into relationships with such like false expectations in a way. And it's, it's not totally our fault. Sometimes this is what we're told. This is the storyline. This is the TV trope. This is the reality show. Even though we know these things aren't reality, it's easy to kind of watch them and think they are, and to take it on and be like, okay, this is what it's really like. But the reality of it, pun intended, is that a relationship is like, it's an incremental step by step, day by day type of situation. I was just fortunate enough, like I'm married now, but I was married before. It didn't work. I learned a lot from that. But my parents, and grandparents were like in multi-decade relationships. So my parents were married almost 60 years, my grandparents 60 years, and uncles 40 plus years. So I got to observe and take in these relationships, and then kind of realize I was just absorbing all this information of like how these people were interacting. And I learned that, it doesn't matter how long you're married, like there's still things you will uncover about your partner that you don't totally know. There are things that you are always seeking to understand. There will be things you will never agree on, no matter how much consensus you want to reach. It's just, we're human. We have our different viewpoints on things. I learned that like it is day by day building. And people always look kind of like, they'll look at like a successful couple, and I'll just use Michelle and Barack Obama, because a lot of times people like call them this power couple. But I love how Michelle always goes back to like, that's not how it started. Like there was a progression to get there. I had to go, she's like, I had to go to therapy and talk out things, because there were things that were really hard in our marriage. So what we're seeing is the outcome of that. We're not seeing like all the day-to-day things that go into it. And it still doesn't mean they don't have hurdles, right? But sometimes we just look on the outside of a couple like a Georgia or Mal Clooney. They look so gorgeous together anyway, but it's like, we're just like, wow, how did they figure it out? But you don't know what's really happening, within that relationship or how they're building. But I want people to know that it does take consistent effort, just like you said, consistent effort, rewarding that, recognizing that, appreciating that. And I think what you see consistently with relationships that last a long time is the gratitude piece.
Yeah.
Because your significant other is going to do things that just annoy you. They can't, you're going to do things that annoy them. There's going to be great moments too, but there's going to be moments where you're just like, man, who did I make the right decision? I think that happens. I think that's a normal part of relationships, because you go through ebbs and flows, and we're just humans. Sometimes we get complacent with things. So I just think if we kind of go into it eyes wide open, being realistic, practical, it just helps things a lot more.
Yeah, it really does. As unsexy as sometimes that can sound.
That's not the dream that they're selling you, right?
Well, there you go. I think also that's problematic. Good point. Like Disney movies, we grew up on Disney, and kids are growing up on Disney now. And I love now that there's shows about strong women. Like I love that Frozen's so popular, and it's about loving your sister. And, it's so great to have those movies. And I couldn't imagine what it's like for those little girls and little boys to have access to these shows that aren't just about, oh, this prince is going to come and save me. And also that we're only in same-sex marriages as well, or partnerships, I'm sorry, not saying opposite sex. Sorry.
I figured, I knew what you meant. I had an idea.
That things look different now. Like, they paint it that it's just easy, right? And it just absolutely is not easy. So it's really, I feel fortunate for children today that they're seeing a lot more diversity, which is...
No, I was watching The School of Good and Evil on Netflix. It was really cute. And it was about like this place where people go to learn to be evil or good. And it was kind of like, funny, but it was probably like a teen movie or a young kids movie. And so if anyone hasn't watched it, don't listen to this part, block your ears or cover your ears up. But in the end, the girl didn't choose the guy that she really had feelings for. She was like, she chose her friendship. And I thought I was like, that's a really interesting message, but I think it's like reality in a way, because sometimes you may choose your friendship and not choose the guy. It doesn't mean you can't have both, so people don't get crazy as you're listening, but I think it's empowering people to just make different decisions around healthy relationships, and also know that it's not the end all be all if you don't get the guy. And so you're right, every trope of a movie before is always the prince, the prince, the prince. And subconsciously, I think it does send this message to women, like there's going to be this person that comes and saves you,
There isn't.
right? And you're looking for that, and there's not. That's not
Nope.
the reality of it.
You are your own knight in shining armor on your own horse. You are the savior. Nobody else.
Right.
You
I
know?
always say you're the ice cream, and like if you meet that person that is great for you, he's the cherry on top. Like they should add to your life, they should complement, but they're not going to totally fill you up. You have to be fulfilled and filled within yourself.
Yeah. And I remember hearing someone, I can't remember who said this, was a long time ago, but you're responsible for your own happiness. Your partner is not responsible for your happiness. And I think that goes back to what you and I were talking about before of, your friend giving you that loving shake up of, like, because that's the reality, right? Though, is that we all have a responsibility. The podcast I just recorded before you, my guest was talking about how her husband cheated and they stayed together, and she was talking about her part in that, and she prompted that. I didn't ask her about that. She said, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, I was, there was a lot of things happening before the breakup, and I can see why my part in it and why it happened." And I was like, "Huh, interesting." You don't really hear that very often. I'm not sure that she's driving that person to do that behavior, like that's on them, but.
Right.
It's interesting to go, okay, well, what's my part in this? What really is the reality? Because it's so easy to just blame somebody else for all your problems instead of going, well, hang on, what's my part?
I like that. I think if you're really thinking of a relationship equitably, that each person has a part to play. A person's actions they take are absolutely their actions, and it isn't always reflective on you. But sometimes there's a history or things that have happened to make someone a little more vulnerable to doing something. I'm not saying that as an excuse, but I think it's important for couples to come to this like Jesus moment and have that discussion, right? And say, look, I really felt like you weren't attentive, or you weren't present a lot of times, or I didn't feel like we were connected. Because if you don't talk about those things, which is I call it the touchy topics, if you don't address those, then things will keep happening over and over. And you'll just be like, why is this track again? This is the same scenario playing out over and over. Because I think when these situations happen, you have to think differently about how you've been acting and interacting in your relationship. So I think that's very powerful, that she could even say, like, look, I'm not condoning what you did, but I probably played a part in these ways, because now she's in her mind telling herself consciously and subconsciously, I got to pay attention to this because it affects my partner this way. It affects our relationship this way.
Right.
I think that takes a lot of emotional maturity to do that.
Yeah. And she's the second person who's told me that they were just about to break up, and then they both said, okay, well, if we're going to break up anyway, we may as well just lay everything out on the table. So then they just laid everything out on the table, literally chatted about everything: sex, relationship, kids, money, all of the things. Then they both became stronger and are in a better position for it. Like she said to me, my relationship's like completely different to the way it was. It's such a better relationship now.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. And I love hearing those stories, because I was like, that's what putting in the work looks like. It's really uncomfortable. It's really confronting. You have to take responsibility. And a lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people, it's just really, really easy to not do that.
Yeah, I was watching Brene Brown did this thing about courage and vulnerability, and I'm a big Brene Brown fan.
Me too.
She
said, everyone, look her up.
Yes, look her up. Go watch the TED Talk.
Yes.
It's very real. I like that she said something. She said, you can't truly be loved if you don't allow yourself to be seen. And what you're talking about with these couples is very similar. Until they were able to kind of peel off the superficial layers of their relationship, go very deep, go places that are uncomfortable, go places that feel a little dark, were they able to see like, oh man, okay, that really annoys that person. Okay, I need to shift the way I'm thinking or communicating, whatever it was. They were able to peel those layers back. And probably because there were two people that just started functioning as roommates, or saying what the other person wanted them to say, or do things that the other person wanted them to do. And we're all familiar with this. It's that relationship you're in where you feel like you're walking on eggshells. You don't feel like you can show up as yourself. And you try and try to like mask and mask and mask. But the only thing that ends up happening is you build up resentment, you snap, right? You get upset because you're not showing up as who you are. So I love that that couple like just sat there and said, you know what? We're at the end of the line anyway. Let's talk about things. Because then they uncovered probably, we really love and care about each other, but this is why we were acting out this way. There were probably was misunderstandings on both sides that they were able to like really talk about and think about in a more open way because they had nothing to lose at that point in a way.
Exactly. Well, I think prior to that, and I'm thinking of this other couple now, there was an unwillingness to go there. So that was the issue. Like the first couple that I'm thinking of, who's not the guest, her partner said to her, I don't accept this. I don't want to break up. And she was like, well, I love you, but I can't do this anymore. So if either something changes or I'm out. Because I'm really at the end of my rope. Like, I just cannot do this. And then he was like, all right, great, let's talk about it then. And that's what prompted their conversation. But prior to that, she'd been asking him for years to talk. And then she was just like, okay, if you don't want to talk about it, fine, but I can't do this then.
But that's the power of a breakup too, in a way, without a breakup, because I think when you're strong in who you are, which is hard, I'm not saying this is easy. This work is hard sometimes, but when you're strong in who you are and you know, this is what I will deal with, this is my line. And sometimes people don't believe talk because it's been happening for years. Some people are more responsive to action. So then when you finally do say, I am removing myself from this situation, they know, oh God, I don't want to lose this. I need to maybe change or shift my behavior, or maybe they don't. Both are good.
Yeah, exactly.
Because either action lets you know where they stand.
Yes. And that's the thing. It wasn't a bluff. She actually applied for a house to move out. She got the house. And so they got someone to look after their children. They got together on the weekend, had a big chat, chatted it out. This is when all this conversation took place. And then on the Monday, she was like, I got accepted for that house. And she's like, oh, and I said, what are you going to do? And she goes, well, I'm not going to take it because we decided that we're going to stay together. And she goes, it kills me though, because it's such a good house. And she's like, I'd love to move out. But she's like, I decided. So she was 100% willing to do it. It was not a bluff. It was not a drill. Right. And I think he knew that too. She doesn't get angry a lot. So when she does, watch out, like.
That's what it sounds like. She was very serious. And I mean, I don't want to stereotype because I don't like to over-index on one sex versus the other, because I think male and females, they actually have a lot in common. But sometimes with men, hearing something, they kind of compartmentalize and don't take action on it. But when they see a woman take action on something, it's very powerful because they know where you stand. They know where your line is and they respect that. And I'm not saying that applies to every man, but I've kind of seen that scenario where the woman's just like, okay, it's been years. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. And the man is devastated when she actually takes the action and moving away, because in his mind, he didn't anticipate or think she would. And sometimes there's actually a saving grace in that moment, similar to that couple, because at that point, he realizes what he's going to lose. Sometimes men operate and act out of loss or potential loss. They're a little different than we are. And I just had this conversation with someone recently, like men really compartmentalize and group things. Like family here, wife here, kids here, job here, fun here. Whereas women, I think our minds were just kind of like, we're melding it all together more. And so you're bringing those two styles of like thinking together. So when he's hearing you say something, it's like, okay, she's complaining about the marriage here, but she seems okay here. And I'm putting in work here and I'm taking care of the home. And so men, I think sometimes it's harder for them to get that emotional component of showing up. That's what you're hearing women say a lot about men today. Like, I need him to emotionally support me. I'm good on these other, areas because I'm financially independent, or I have this, or I have this, but I just want help around the house. I want help with the kids. I want you to listen and feel what I'm feeling, discomfort. So I think those are things we need to get comfortable, even though they're uncomfortable, discussing and setting expectations around. And it can go the other way too. But these are just some of the things I see in talking to men and women.
I'm just going to bring it back to the reality question. What if we're in one of those couples and it doesn't work out and she does leave for real? If we're in the post initial shock of the first 2 weeks, what do you think is the most productive way to begin to move forward and you're reeling? So like right after a breakup, when reality sets in and you're like, oh, you're in shock. It's hard to go back through your mind and sift through all the things that you might have done differently or it could have happened differently. What do you suggest when you're in that state of just like super fresh breakup?
I think like we have this desire again to move through things quickly and to just get it done. And I just don't think that's realistic. We're human, we have feelings. I think like a way to deal with a breakup is to deal with the breakup as it's happening and to deal with what's in front of you. There's a great saying like it's okay to cry when you want to cry. It's okay to laugh when you want to laugh. It's okay to go have fun if that's what you want to do in that moment. Do what serves you and makes you feel better through that process, as long as it's not harmful, as long as it's not causing you to numb out everything. I don't think people should just stay in continual pain. I always say like there's the waddling. There's those people that no matter how when you call them, no matter what's going on in their life, good, bad, whatever, it's always just the same conversation. And you're on the outside like, but you said you wanted this and you're still like not like saying anything positive about that happening because they're just stuck. So I don't think you should be stuck in a perpetual place of pain in a relationship. But what I do think is that you allow yourself to gradually feel the different emotions. Understand you're going to feel hurt. Understand you're going to, you're going to want to cry. Understand you might want to go on a date. I think all of that's fine within reason. Nothing should be done to any extreme, but within reason, you have to do things to keep yourself moving forward. I think the key thing is just to think about it in the sense that, okay, I'm out of this situation, whether voluntary or involuntary. There's maybe a reason this is happening. What can I learn from this? What can I learn from this relationship? I think when you approach it that way too, you kind of trigger your mind to like think of it, differently and more dynamically for your future. Realize this is a moment in time. Write it out, voice memo it out, whatever you need to do. Like, I mean, listen to your sad songs, but don't keep listening to your sad songs forever. But I guess what I'm saying is like, get it out of your system. Just give yourself time, don't beat yourself up, but just don't stay in it. I think that's the key. Don't wallow in it. When you sense you're just going down a road of depression, go get help. I think that's the other thing. Like sometimes you need support to get through things. And it's okay to seek out that support, whether it's through your friends or whether it's through a counselor or whether it's through finding a hobby to get back connected to who you are. Whatever that thing is, you got to find people that are going to kind of take your mind away from that as well. I think that's an important part too.
I think to your point of taking yourself out of it as well, I used to always think, oh, I'm distracting myself, but I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. Like I remember when I was going through my breakup, I'd have to be around my friends a lot to stop thinking about it. And it really helped. It was like learning how to be myself again, you know, without this thing that was just this gaping hole in my heart. So that really helped. And you're right. I think giving yourself grace as well. We're so judgy of ourselves. And it's so harsh. Like one of my best friends, she is so harsh on herself. And I didn't realize I stayed with her when we were overseas for a week, and I had never stayed with her like in close quarters before. And I did not realize how anxious she was. She lives in anxiety. I've never seen it like that before because at that time I'd never experienced it before. And I was like, wow, this must be really difficult. And I said to her one day, I was like, would you speak to me the way that you speak to yourself? And she's like, never. And I was like, well, yeah, well, why do you do it to yourself then? It's really harsh. Like the stuff you say to yourself is like super harsh and it's just not really helpful. Like, why are you being so mean to yourself?
Right. And she wouldn't have that realization if you probably didn't say it to her, because if you stay in your own space and you're like, I'm just going to deal with this on my own, you're not getting that feedback. The only feedback you're getting is yourself. And you could be telling yourself a message that is so torn and so dysfunctional and so not healthy for you. And that is the power of the support, whether, like I said, it's talking to a counselor or whether it's your friends, your trusted friends, whoever you need or whatever you need to get through that in a healthy way. It can lift you up and give you a different perspective. And that's what you were giving her. You're like, I'm watching you and I'm seeing this, and this is not healthy. And you wouldn't do this to me. So why are you doing it to yourself? And I bet you that was kind of an aha moment for her, because often the person that is the most difficult to see is ourselves. We're too close to ourselves. But when other people are there, that's how relationships I think are hard too. It's a mirror. It's like, oh, I'm outed. I can't hide. It's like, even in a friendship, the friend is calling you out on their stuff. It's like, you'll be mad at them sometimes, like, man, why'd they say that? But then you can't help, if you have self-awareness, and you want to really emotionally mature to like reflect on some of the things they're saying, especially if it's a consistent message. So I think that's the power of like dealing with a breakup, but realizing that at some point you may need support, and you should seek out that support and
Yeah.
allow people to help guide you through that process.
I think that's really, really valuable. Super valuable. Yeah, I think if there's a shortcut, that's it. Get support.
But as we can see from the relationships we see where people break up and like they go to the next one, it always like it may work for a little bit, like it's a distraction, to have that other person, but it never fails. In time, things bubble up. And normally, what I see from my side, because people are coming to me when they're in pain. They're not usually coming to me when the relationship is going amazing. It's usually when it's like, what should I do? Or as a last resort, or I need another point of guidance. But it's things that tend to bubble to the surface that have not been dealt with, either from that relationship or a previous relationship. So with a breakup, that's why it's so important to just sometimes cleanse yourself, like give yourself that space to get to knowing yourself, spending time with yourself, enjoying yourself, just almost, and I know it sounds corny, almost dating yourself. Like,
Totally.
man, like Talia, who was Talia before this, and what has she lost during this? And like, how can she reconnect to those things that give her joy? I think that is what helps you also to kind of rebuild, because you're like, whoa, I have this time I can really be using in a purposeful way. I mean, if you want to say making it productive, like I think sometimes being single is some of the most productive self-development time. Because when you're in a relationship, it's going to take extra bandwidth to do things. You're not going to have all that extra time to just focus on yourself. So I think that's a way to also make that time, valuable.
Okay, just before we wrap up, it's been so lovely speaking to you, Elizabeth. I was speaking to my assistant about this interview, actually. We were talking about breakups, and she mentioned that we make these stories up in our head to validate our feelings in the moment. And I thought that was, incredibly perceptive. What's your take on that?
I do. I think, we tell ourselves a lot of stories. Like I said, things sometimes come from other people, but sometimes just our own selves, things that we take on that aren't real. And we keep morphing this story around it, this track in our head. Like you'll hear women say, there's no good men, or you'll hear men say, all women are materialistic. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because like then you start to key in on that. And if anyone shows anything with that particular trait, you're so hyper focused on it that you don't see the other opportunities around you. So whether it's that, or I'm not pretty enough, or I'm not thin enough, or if I was a supermodel, I have a better life, or people just tell themselves some crazy stories in a way, and then they keep percolating on these stories. And the reality is it takes someone sometimes to come in their life and say, nope, you're wrong. Whether that's a friend, whether that's a counselor, whether that's your pastor, whether that's a mom, a dad, or whoever. But the bottom line is like you too. That's why I always go back to that foundational piece of self-love. And self-love is not just like, oh, I love myself, I'm amazing, I'm this great person. It's about self-accountability. It's about like recognizing where you're weak, where you're vulnerable, where you have some challenges. It's like that lady in that relationship who said, okay, he definitely messed up. There was infidelity, but like, how can I be better? That's the self-love piece, is really looking at yourself, because that's the only piece you can totally control. Really, you really can't always control the outcome of others, but if you get like really clued in on who you are, that's a difference maker, because I think it sets you up for a better foundation for relationships, and most importantly, it sets you up for the foundation of having that relationship with yourself, which you're going to be with yourself for life. So it's one of the most important things that you can focus on.
The only person that will never ever leave you until
Exactly.
the end. Elizabeth, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today. If people want to find out more about you, if people want to come and get some coaching from you, how can they do that?
Yes, so come to my website at ElizabethOverstreet.com. And it's just spelled just like it sounds. So you don't have to complicate it. It's Elizabeth, Elizabeth as in boy, ETH, and then Overstreet, OV as in victory, ERSTREET.com. You can find out all about me. There's lots of free content there for you to read. You'll see where all my social media is located and all that fun stuff. So don't be afraid to talk to someone. Just like Talia shared about her friend, it's often getting a different perspective that really can change things for your relationships. And that's where I get my most joy. Like, I love this work. I get to do it so purposeful. I love just seeing people connect with themselves, first of all, and really recognize their value. It makes me so teary-eyed. And then when they find someone they can connect with in a loving relationship, that's like, oh my God, that's even the pinnacle of it for me. So come check me out.
Thank you so much again for being here. I really appreciate your insight.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
This podcast is a Rebel Love production. To find the links mentioned in this episode, go to rebellove.com/let love begin. Amazing. That was awesome.